we're here at the former St. Louis Hills Office Center, the three-story building behind me. And this building has a very interesting story in recent years. A couple of years ago, this building was almost an L-shaped structure, and there was a wing out from this main building that faces Chippewa Street that had 2 floors of office space over a concrete parking garage structure. Now in 2007 that was all demolished, and the owner of the building at the time said there was structural failure and it could not be saved, but he was going to endeavor to restore the remaining section back to its 1950s era charm. Now, this isn't some great preservation calamity, because this is not one of the greatest works of modern architecture in St. Louis. However, it's definitely not a bad building. Now, the St. Louis Hills Office Center was built in 1957, and it was designed by Robert Graham, who was not really one of those architect names that rings very many bells. I actually can't name a single other building that he did. But one of the things that makes the St. Louis Hills Office Center interesting is that at the time it was built, Chippewa was Route 66, and this southwestern end of the city was attracting business and offices and stores away from the older parts of South St. Louis. So this was a booming area in the 1950s, and this office building was part of that boom. And it was a medical office building, and consequently it was built with very, very small windows on the sides and no windows on the front except for that center, or that main entrance in the stair column. So admittedly not an easy building to adapt for other types of uses that maybe require or desire more sunlight and more view of the neighborhood. But I think nonetheless what's happened here is somewhat of a travesty. The project has made several changes to the building, the biggest of which is this gigantic atrium addition and new entrance off of the parking area, and the complete reconstruction of that eastern wall that was originally beautiful red brick. It's now clad in a very pale gray stucco or ephes type finish. The grid on that section does match the original concrete grid on the front wall, but having those two materials side by side, the flimsiness of the current material and that really almost deathly gray color next to that beautiful concrete, really not a pleasant contrast. They also pulled all the original glass out of that entrance bay. I don't know why, it was perfectly good. They're going to have to put new glass in its place. They're building this new canopy. They took down one of the adjacent commercial buildings, one of the one-story stores, for no apparent reason. They actually had a tenant just 2 or 3 years ago. And they took off the beautiful stylized 1950s green lettering that spelled out the name of the building. I mean, obviously they're going to give this new reborn building a new name, but they didn't salvage it, didn't offer it up for sale, just threw it out in the dumpster. So I'm going to have to say I really, really hate this project. So one of the things these neighborhood movie houses, one of the problems they have that I think prevents greater appreciation is to keep up with changing times and changing architectural tastes. And of course, mind you, they're selling a very specific and very time-sensitive product, the motion picture. So the Art Deco design was the hallmark of 1930s architecture. Earlier movie houses are in earlier styles, very exotic, get your attention, get you inside, lavish marquees and neon. Well, in the 1960s, a different trend in American architecture was present, much more streamlined, modern movement of architecture, and the Avalon was redone on the first floor in the marquee to reflect that. So that kind of covers up some of the original charm, and so a lot of architectural historians have not looked fondly upon neighborhood movie houses because a lot of times they've been altered over the years, and so they don't really have that original historic appearance. The Avalon, we're very fortunate because up above that first floor, it's largely intact. And so we have this amazing ochre and yellow patterned brick in these geometric patterns, and the brick bond itself has a checkerboard effect that really creates, even in the most simple parts, a very dazzling look. And that's of course punctuated by these multicolored terracotta panels with floral scenes. Very beautiful, very lavish, and a terracotta peach-colored cap on the building. The building steps up in the center. It could just be a plain flat wall. Some of the movie houses were, but this one has a little panache and a little swagger to it. And the marquee, of course, dates to the late 1960s. It's not as beautiful as the original. It still has caught many people's eyes. Until very recently, there were red letters in the letter slots. Famously, the word clothes reduced to the name Chloe was on the marquee for many years. Unfortunately, the Avalon is a faded beauty. There's been some damage to it. The city's put up this plywood fencing around it in the last 2 years to apparently protect our heads from the eventual fall of this marquee. The Avalon was tied up after its closure in 1999. The ownership was a very uncertain situation. There was a corporation that owned it, a theater family that had owned it and leased it to its last operator. The son of the previous owner, had kind of held this building hostage, and it took a court order in 2010 to get him removed as a trustee of that corporation, and one of his relatives stated as a trustee. The city and the aldermen in this neighborhood have been pushing for years to get a clear title. He would not sell. He wanted millions of dollars for this building. Ironically, though, even with the clear title, the building is listed for sale right now for about $1 million, and there have been no offers. So we don't know what's going to happen here. A couple years ago, Quick Trip looked at this site for thinking it would be a great site if they could go all the way down to Chippewa at the corner and get a very large gas station here. But they eventually built up the street by the Uncle Bill's Pancake House, so it's not likely they're going to look at this site again. There's just been a change in aldermen in this neighborhood from the incumbent who had been there for over a decade to a new alderwoman, Carol Howard. Some movement in the neighborhood to create a historic district designation. The Avalon would certainly be a contributing resource to a Southampton historic district, so that could make tax credits available, make it a little easier to rehab this building. There are some bad problems in the roof, a lot of water getting in there, but all the seats are in there. There's a lot of integrity to the structure of the building, even though it looks bad, some things have fallen off of it, there are holes in the roof. The basic bones are really sound. This building could be easily converted to something. It's not easy to figure out what to do with a giant 647-seat space, but I think St. Louis probably has someone creative enough to figure that one out. This building is interesting for a variety of reasons. For one thing, a lot of the commercial buildings around this intersection have been lost, and so it's really nice to see one that's still standing in a relatively intact condition. Another thing that makes this building unique and beautiful is the use of stock terracotta pieces in both buff and green colors. In the center of the top parapet, the round piece is a stock piece that a lot of the terracotta companies in the United States sold in the 1920s, and it's inspired by the work of the famous Chicago architect Louis Sullivan. So this is called Sullivan-esque terracotta. A lot of the different companies sold this. Builders could use it and make their building look like it was somehow tied to this great architect and his work. But they are very common. You see Sullivan-esque pieces all over. But the primary reason I'm showing this building is the first floor storefront, which at first glance may look like your typical remodeling in the 1950s or 1960s. But here there's a special pedigree. This remodeling actually dates to 1946 and was designed by Harris Armstrong. Now, most people who know Harris Armstrong know him as the best known modernist architect in Missouri. His works are big works: the Ethical Society, the U-Haul building, the Stockstrom residence, homes all over Oakland and Kirkwood. And Armstrong's legacy is tied with prominent clients and very expensive projects. This is an early small project, and he remodeled this building for the building owner just to give that storefront a little style, put it into the 1940s, into the streamline era. So we have this very interesting tapered curve concrete form that projects out from the building. It even goes inside of that first floor space into behind the building wall, as if it's somehow organically connected to that earlier structure, which of course it isn't, but it gives that illusion. Going along with that, the storefront then angles in to the center entrance, and because that span is so wide, there is the need for this round center steel column in the center supporting that canopy. It's a really beautiful composition. It really, I think, works rather well with the earlier terracotta of the building, which I think dates to the 1920s, probably about 1923. It's a little eclectic and not very well known. People pass by, thousands of people every day, probably don't give it a second thought, and very few people would tie this building to the legacy of one of the most famous Midwestern modernists, and definitely the most prominent modernist architect in Missouri's history, Harris Armstrong. It's all right here at Grand and Gravois.